morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest.
Welcome back, Slava, to the world of Cradle.
Hey, Jonathan, good to be back here in the world of Cradle.
Don't sound so excited.
Well, I'm excited. I am just a very stoic, sacred artist this morning.
Mm-hmm. So you're just like Ethan?
Yes.
No.
Stoicism mixed in with insanity and sarcasm.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, we're back, folks, for another episode of Cradle. Do we have any housekeeping today? I don't think we have any housekeeping.
No.
We're back. That's the housekeeping.
Yeah,
right?
We're back. There we go.
Book 6. You know the episode rundown. About 2 episodes with us, and then a 3rd episode with guests, depending on how long the book is. I'm pretty happy that we have finally kind of honed in the brand a little more, that this is a book club, right? This is a casual book club for all of our go-to fun internet friends. You pop in for the books you like, and you leave for the books you don't, and you chit-chat with us in the meantime.
I like it.
Yes.
As you guys have heard in the previous episodes, 99 and 100, respectively, this has been quite a journey for Jonathan and I to hone in where we are now. So I'm excited for the next leg of this journey.
Yeah, you brought up a good point that I honestly just forgot. Like, we've passed the 100 episode mark.
Yeah, this is episode 101.
101 for those in the college world. I wanted to read this little paragraph as a reminder to our friends out there in the internet world that SideQuest is a casual book club for readers and audiobook listeners who want to discuss their favorite books, but don't always have a group to discuss them with. So with this in mind, tune in to go deeper into story elements, world building, character development, and more. We're glad to have you.
Well, all right. As we set off on today's side quest, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you guys never miss an episode. And with that, let's get into it. Underlord by Wight. The Dread Gods are awakening, prompting the monarchs of Cradle to hold the Uncrowned Tournament to cultivate new sacred artists. The Akura clan opens Night Wheel Valley to their vassal states, the Black Flame Empire and the Saitian Kingdom, where sacred treasures await. Akura Charity will select the top 3 Underlords from each kingdom, with a focus on targeting Lindon due to his role in Akura Harmony's death. In Night Wheel Valley, Saitian Kiro and his protector Miera confront Lindon, who eventually becomes an Underlord. Yeren manages to advance to Underlord 2. She becomes an Underlady amidst the chaos of a surprise attack by the Saitian Kingdom on the Black Flame Empire. During this turmoil, Lindon kills Prince Kiro, prompting Prince Daji to vow revenge, only to be defeated by Mercy. Afterward, Charity announces the vassal state team from the tournament. It is Yeren, Ethan, and Naru Saya who will compete, while Lindon will participate on the Black Flame team to pay his debt. Meanwhile, in Sacred Valley, Weishi Kelsa, hiding from hunters, encounters Orthos, a flaming Turnal sent by her brother Lindon, and the Abaddon continue their struggle against Roshir as they fight to protect their worlds. This book is brought to you by none other than, as already mentioned, Wight. He is a New York Times and #1 Kindle best-selling author of the Cradle series, a space fantasy series entitled The Last Horizon, and a handful of other books that he regularly forgets to mention. His true power is only unleashed during a full moon when he transforms into a monstrous mongoose, or so he says on his blog. Will lives in Florida, lurking beneath the swamps to ambush prey. He graduated from the University of Central Florida, where he received a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and a cursed coin of Spanish gold. And now we know where his humor comes from. I'm sure it's a self-published bio too, which he's noted for being a successful self-published author, winning the Stabby Award for Best Self-Published Independent Novel of 2013 on Reddit's fantasy subreddit for his book, House of Blades. Wight subsequently won the same award 2 more times in 2018 for Ghostwater and 2019 for Underlord. Now, due to his number of wins, Wight was retired from eligibility for the awards in 2020. The audiobooks for Bloodline, Reaper, Dreadgod, and Waybound, narrated by none other than Travis Baldree, appeared on the New York Times bestseller list for the month that they were released. And the audiobook of the final volume of Cradle, Waybound, which we'll get to, we promise, was the bestseller on Audible the week it was released. So our man is killing it.
He is. I missed the humor moment when you were like, we know where his, what did you say a second ago?
I think his humor comes from
His humor?
Because that's the press
Comes from
release.
the Spanish Gold?
Yeah. Not the press release. That's his press bio on his blog.
Yeah,
Like,
I know.
Okay. Well, who writes that? This guy does. Every other author we read their bios, either from Wikipedia or their press package, they're all more or less serious. It just goes line by line of where they're from, what they've done, and the awards they won. This guy's a little different.
Yes. But, the Spanish Gold is what gives Will his humor. Cursed Spanish Gold.
I wish I had some cursed Spanish gold.
Me too. I just exercise the poltergeist and then ask it to duplicate. Not the poltergeist, the gold. Just to clarify.
Right. Keep wishing for more wishes.
I don't know. We've learned that lesson. That doesn't work. It's a broken system.
Especially with 2 psychos like us breaking each other's wishes.
Speak for yourself. I'm less of a psycho and more of a psych.
Yep, that's true.
It's early. I can't have humor because I don't have cursed Spanish Gold.
There it is.
Okay, I just want to bring something up, and I'm sure that I talked about this in the last Cradle book. I don't remember the details, but so Will wins all these awards for audiobooks, for New York Best Times, on these subreddits for the Stabby Awards, and then he wraps up the series. 12 books, Waybound. That's it. We're done, right? But clearly, the audience wants more.
Yes, you mentioned this.
Yes, and I'm going to make the same point again in hopes, and this is not a jab in the sense of like judgment. Well, I guess it kind of is judgment. It's not a jab in the sense of like punishment, right? It's like, hey, we want more. We'll pay you for it.
You're not mad, you're disappointed.
Thanks, Dad. If I want to disappoint 2 people at once, I'll just have dinner with my parents. Oh, man. But yeah, I'm so adamant about like, if your book is really selling well, then give us a little more. You don't have to like keep it, throttle 10 the way that he was doing just to blow through the series, because I understand like authors want to write other stuff, and you should, because that might blow up too. But like, at least give us a drip, like 1 Cradle book every year and a half or something like that. That's just my, focus on your other series, but give us a little something here and there, because like you'll keep the audience excited. You'll keep us wanting to pay you money. We can make those animated pieces that you want to make because we also want to watch them.
I suppose I'll ask this question for real when we get to the final book, but I'm wondering, each time you say this, I always wonder, when is enough? When does a story end?
So I really, really want to quote something from book 10 at you that...
Quote away.
Well,
if it's not going to spoil a plot.
It does, because of where these characters are at the moment. I will just say that I want more. There's a hunger. There's an insatiable hunger that needs to be filled. Hunger Madra.
You have a hole that only Will Wight can fill.
Yeah, it's true. It's somewhere. Never mind. It's somewhere. It's somewhere in the deep
recesses of your body.
I purposefully abstained from saying the word on my body, specifically for that reason. Oh my gosh. Well, I guess we're back, folks. We're definitely back, because you're getting the same nonsense you always get.
12 minutes in and we've devolved already.
Yeah. Woof.
Well, with that out of the way, let's continue the conversation about him writing Cradle. So you want more out of this, obviously. You definitely know more about Cradle series than I do. You're a super fan, I would say. What do you know about Wight's inspiration for Cradle? Where did that all come from? How did this project come about?
I will get into that in just a second, but I think to be a super fan, all you have to do is give him money. I've bought the last 4 Kickstarters he's had. No, 3. 3? So let's see. The animated series, books 1 through 3 I missed. I got 4 through 6, so that was on the Kickstarter. I back bought the last set, and then I bought the new set. Yeah, 4 Kickstarters. So I think I've just purchased the title. I don't know if I've actually earned it.
Either way.
Same.
Same. Take it away, superfan.
Okay. Well, so in some of the research, it's been noted that Will found his inspiration for Cradle by mixing and synthesizing a few of the things that he actually loves, which is progression fantasy, martial arts, and Eastern cultivation novels. And in our last guest episode, we heard from JT diving in a little more in-depthly than you or I were familiar with on the Eastern cultivation novels. So I won't actually focus on that because we're going to have him back during our guest episode, and we're going to have a new guest, a new old guest, new guest that you guys are familiar with, who decided that they wanted to read Cradle, and so they're going to join us. So we're going to have a massive 6-person guest episode. It might just be chaos, and it might be great.
Probably will.
I don't know. Anyway, so Will created a story centered around a character who grows stronger through a structured system and path for personal improvement that requires him overcoming challenges, both external and internal, because he was inspired by those Chinese web novels. But the biggest thing that Will wanted to look at in writing this was he wanted to explore what it meant to have a character seek power, but that character still remains grounded by their personal values and motivations. And this is one of the reasons that we constantly see, and we've talked about this, like Lindon still goes, oh, apologies, oh, gratitude, even though he's like clearly more powerful than the other characters. I think we start to see that contrast more and more starting in Skysworn. I was going to call it Skyward. That's a Sanderson novel. Skysworn. And you're like, why is he still being so humble when he's in an honor culture that's dog-eat-dog world? And it's because of this. It's Will's main thesis for what he was looking to explore. It's, what if a character seeks power, but remains grounded in their personal values and motivations every time? I think this is really relatable for the readers because throughout the whole time we were growing up, there's always this like, I just want power, He-Man. Ah. And people they say, power corrupts absolutely. I think there's a human desire to see power used well.
Yeah.
And I won't go down a spiritual or theology note on this one, but there's a hunger in the human hearts for seeing power used with a true measure of justice and mercy from characters and people. So a short story long on Will's motivations, and I'm sure there's more than that JT might be able to dive into with us, but that's what I dug up.
I see Yeren doing the same thing, struggling with the same issues internally, right? Throughout the story, Yeren grapples with her blood shadow. It's this parasitic entity that can consume her, and although blood shadow boosts her power, she does have fears about it taking over. And I think it creates a great internal conflict for her because she's, bristly, she's curt, terse, she's very pragmatic. This is the way it is, says her mind. That's at the outside of Yeren. That's a survival response, maybe. But she does have an internal contact between relying on its power and staying true to herself. I couldn't give you specifics now. I would have to go back to my Kindle books and my highlights. But she is hesitant to unleash it fully, I think. And that speaks to what you just said about Lindon. We see Yeren struggle with the same stuff.
Oh, 100%. We're actually gonna get a lot more with Yeren in, let's see, this is Underlord. Next up is Uncrowned, I think. Does that sound right?
No, Wintersteel.
No. Wintersteel happens afterward. I'm looking. Yeah, Uncrowned, because there's a tournament coming up. So it's Underlord, Uncrowned, because it's the Uncrowned King tournament, where we get to see a few actually really key things happen for Yeren. And then Uncrowned has this thing that happened in, which was the other book? Oh, the end of Soulsmith, where you're like, oh, he has this duel. So something happens at the end of Uncrowned that doesn't actually wrap up until the following book. It's a really great cliffhanger. And it happens at the beginning of Wintersteel, book 8. But it's just one of those moments where it feels like a 90s TV show, like, what will happen next time to the Power Rangers? Will they make it out, or will they finally be conquered by I forget her name?
Looking forward to it.
It'll be fun. Yeren and her Blood Shadow are going to get a little more play at the next 2 books. So, excited for that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I kind of felt like I couldn't get into this book as much as I did the others because there's just so much going on in my personal life and work life. I was just constantly busy. And when I read this, I was actually preparing for my trip, for the wedding I was in. So there's a lot of stuff just taking my attention. But as I was preparing for this podcast and doing notes and going back and rereading some stuff that I highlighted, I was like, oh yeah, so this is a pretty decent book. Made me remember that I also love Cradle and want to see what happens next.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. And that's honestly one of the things that I have been thinking about for the last 100 episodes is this idea of like, look, sometimes you and I have a lot going on. We still read the book, but we don't get the immersion in the book the way that we want to. And that's why I really wanted to hone the brand in to be like, it's a casual book club. Just show up. Read what you can. Just show up. Well, you and I can't read what we can. We read the whole thing.
Right.
But for the rest of you guys, this is that type of book club where just show up and enjoy. And if you didn't read it and you were like, I don't want to commit to reading this, and then you hear us talking about it, you go, oh, actually, that sounds kind of interesting. And then you can go back and read it. It's almost like an oral Cliff Notes of sorts.
Yeah, I like that.
And it's not just one person badgering at you about it. It's, it's a discussion of like, well, what do you think about Lindon and da-da-da. And, JT coming in with like, I just see him like pushing his glasses up. Okay. Now, here's the thing about cultivation novels, which we need. I want an expert like that who specifically talks about stuff like that, but that's the way that I see you. Shout out JT. Can't wait to have you back. But you did tell me, and I'll give you guys a little behind the scenes here. You said that this was your favorite book so far.
Did I?
Okay.
Maybe I had an internal conflict. I did say that now that I'm thinking about it.
Of the series.
The series, yeah.
Not necessarily everything we've read.
And that's because of Yeren and Lyndon's arcs in this book. I think their internal struggles, which we'll get into in a little bit, and their relationship. I think their relationship entered a new phase because they're now both Underlords. They went through this horrific thing where Yeren could have died, and I think they've become closer. And the internal struggles are a lot more defined is the wrong word, pronounced maybe, or maybe they're the same as in any of the other books on the same level, I mean, given the same attention by the author. But to me, I was paying attention more. I even would re-listen to a couple of the scenes, specifically where everybody thought Yeren was going to die.
Yeah, what were you feeling when you were reading that? Because I know Yeren's one of your favorite characters in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share my thoughts afterward, but want to hear yours first.
I was honestly afraid that she would die. I thought Will Wight would kill her off.
Mm-hmm.
And based on some of the cryptic answers I got from you, and I was like, wait a minute. When Jonathan said that Yeren goes away in a book, and I'm like, I forget what book he says that she goes away. Like, is this what he meant, goes away?
Okay, Tommy. Grandpa went away forever.
I was a little disappointed thinking that, man, Yeren might die. And listen, I'm the type of guy that I don't need happy endings or clean storylines. It's okay to, kill off a character. It's okay to show the reality of a world such as this. That's what makes the book believable.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's a fantasy, not a fantasy, it's a fantastical world. It's not based on a real place. So when she wasn't dead, I was like, oh, oof, okay. I was invested. It took me for a ride,
Yeah. For me, during this reread, because I reread it while I was on my honeymoon, I think I did myself a disservice because I was not at all worried about her. I was like, I don't feel like, and not even thinking like, oh, well, there's another, X amount of books. I was thinking, this doesn't feel like there's enough tension around her death. I almost wanted there to be a few more instances of let's try this. It didn't work. Let's try this to build that tension just a little more. But the reason I say that, and this is where the disservice comes in, is I had just finished rereading all 4 books of Stormlight Archives. I'm living in, 200 hours of audiobooks, 60 chapters of Kaladin almost killing himself or dying. So I think that the contrast there for me was simply like I was coming out of a very long emotional journey and switched over to, I'm going to call it pop fiction, basically.
Yeah.
Because it's so fast. And I was like, oh, well, that ended quickly. It didn't hold the same tension, but I was contrasting it with the book that I had just finished, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember the first time I read this and I thought something similar. Yeren's not my favorite character. She's a favorite character, but not the favorite character, right? For me, I was like, oh man, I really hope she doesn't die, but like I could understand if she did. So it's interesting when you read a different book or you're reading a different book in tandem, right? And you flavor the text of what you're reading. So
Yeah.
didn't dislike it, still very much love the Cradle series, but that was this read-through's direct emotional response in those moments.
Yeah, and for me, I read this first because I wanted to get it out of the way because I knew we're doing Sanderson, Words of Radiance, and I dived into Words of Radiance right after. So for me, I didn't have that Sanderland exposition of everything that's going.
It's like heroin.
Yeah, right. So I started with Wight and pop fiction, as you say, everything moves fast because I wanted that out of the way, and then I went into Sanderson.
Yeah.
So I got to experience it a little bit different way. But I can see how that happens when you have a book that takes sometimes 20 chapters to describe or go through an event or an arc, and then this happens in 12 pages.
A chapter, yeah. It's like taking a shot or sipping on a nice scotch for an hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
That's how I see it, where it's like, oh, it's so quick. And not that that's a bad thing. Like, it fits for the world. It's 100%, this isn't a knock. It fits in the world. They're fighting. It's a fast-moving thing. It's just I set myself up. And this is one of the things about reading books that I think that we should take into consideration is just if you're reading, I read a lot of business books. So if I'm reading a business book, it's not going to interfere with the flavor text of a Cradle or a Sanderson or Strugatsky Brothers, right? Because it's so different. But if it's familiar in the same realm, then it has the opportunity to flavor it. So anyway, enough on that.
I think a nice dovetail to this would be a side quest within a side quest here on about like the fears and challenges our friends Lindon, Yerin, and Mercy kind of face to become Underlords. Lindon and Yerin more specifically. Oh no, Mercy becomes an Underlord, Underlady too.
Yeah.
So
she has to she has a different path though because she comes from such a wealthy family.
Right.
And she was doing her little rebellion thing. In our lives, and this is, I think I've mentioned this at least in the first 3 Cradle books, we are all encouraged to pursue personal development. Some of us take up the challenge and mantle, and some of us don't. But in pursuing, if you're a person who takes up the mantle in your own life, and this is not you comparing with someone else, it's just taking the mantle up in your own life, you will encounter moments like these characters, Lindon, Yerin, and Mercy, where you have to confront yourself, because that's where the real leaps of personal growth happen, where you go, oh, for Lindon, I fear falling behind. For Yeren, I fear isolation and like Lindon overshadowing her, and Mercy fears hurting her friends, right? Until you confront these things in yourself. And that means 2 things. Confront means being honest with yourself that it exists and that's how you feel. And then, not to get too Jungian on you, but you have to integrate that into your life. And that looks a bunch of different ways, so I'm not going to get into that. But integrating that fear to move past it by conquering it, making it become a part of you as fuel forward, that always speaks to me because I am one of those people who picked up the torch for personal growth, sometimes reluctantly, maybe oftentimes reluctantly, because I just got sick of myself. I got sick of like, well, woe is me. And then you sit there long enough, you're like, man, I am such an annoying little dweeb. But the only person who's going to do something about it is you. No one's going to do your laundry for you. No one's going to go grocery shopping for you. No one's going to make you lose weight. It's got to be you. You have to do it yourself. Like, yeah, you can hire someone to do it. Or if you live with your parents, like they might do it for you. But at the end of the day, like you will not have the life you want, which is available. I just want to emphasize that you get to have the life that you want if you're willing to pay the cost. And the cost is oftentimes hard work and confronting your personal growth. You can have the life you want. I'm going to reiterate this 3 or 4 times. You can have the life you want if you are willing to pay the cost. The cost is confronting your personal growth and addressing things that you're not addressing. So anyway, I love these moments where Will made it a part of the story that the characters have to confront themselves and their internal struggles to get higher levels of power, because I truly believe that that's how the world works. You don't just fall into success. You have to work really, really hard. And oftentimes that means working on yourself, or, because we've all seen this, you play into all of your worst strengths. Like we see people who trample on others and find their way to be super successful, but nobody likes them. And it's like, well, there are other ways to do it, but you're not going to, like at the top, you're going to be alone, like North Strider. Literally alone.
And I want to take what you just said and apply it to the book in the way that we can discuss some of these moments, and also ask you which one of these, and I'll answer this question too, which one of these do you identify with most? So for Lyndon,
it's Lindon.
Fear of falling behind. Great. As Lyndon advances towards Underlord, Yeren contemplates her fear that he might surpass her and move on without her. And at the same time, like a deep-seated care for him, as we see in this book. Lyndon admits to himself at the same time as Yeren's going through this, he's afraid of Yeren surpassing him and leaving him behind. She's always been a step or 10 ahead of him since he met her. And this coupled with his ongoing journey of self-worth, apologies, and this one creates a nice tension, I think, as he tries to keep up with her strength and skill. And when it comes to Mercy, she knows that she has to make a tough decision, that she has to go back to her family. She can't stay with Yeren and Lindon. The right thing to do is to separate herself from them, which actually allows her to protect them, but also might weaken their friendship. So it's kind of like a difficult farewell. For me, it's Yeren. I don't mind being alone. I don't like being lonely. You know what I mean? And so her fear of being left behind, because she's all alone, she got her mentor, that's not the right word for it, but I'm going to use the word, her mentor who taught her all this stuff, got her to be self-sufficient and able to defend herself and move forward. And she has an inner drive to always move forward. She's taken up the mantle, to use your word. But at the same time, she is self-sufficient, but afraid of being truly alone because she has nobody besides Lindon, Orthos, and Athan, and now Mercy. I think Mercy's kind of growing on her. So for me...
Reluctantly for her, but yes.
Right. So for me, it's definitely Yeren.
Give me a hug! Well, why are you touching me?
Right, exactly. I see in myself like a briskly, prickly outside and a more softer inside, because I might not have a lot of sentiments in life. I'm not prone to sentimentality, as I mentioned before, but I do have a softer side where, and maybe that's not even the right term, but I think the audience and you know what I'm getting at. There are some things that I am prone to care about deeply, not just brush him off as like, well, who cares what John thinks about me, or who cares what Bob said in the last week's meeting. Like that kind of stuff I don't care about, but I am prone to emotion, deep emotion when something moves me. And I think I see that in Yeren with her fear of isolation, with her fear of Lindon surpassing her. That's where I really identified with Yeren even more so. My identification with her as a character, my love for her as a character was more solidified in this book because of those things. Now, obviously, you are connected to Lindon, but maybe you can go a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, I will in a second. I want you to just do a quick explanation for us, the audience. What's the difference between being alone and being lonely, to your best of your ability, right? Because we didn't pre-talk about this, so kind of throwing it at you on the fly.
I'm happy to answer that. So alone means from something as simple as just being alone. Like you don't have a wife, you don't have a girlfriend, maybe you're separated from some of your friends, you are posted somewhere in your job where you don't have a lot of interaction with humans. That's just the most simplest thing. And I think that covers the gamut, where it's a geographical aloneness or being alone as in not having a significant other, or maybe even a lot of friends, or only having one or two friends. Being lonely is being completely isolated, whether it's geographical, emotional, physical isolation. And so those examples that I just said, there's a myriad of reasons why one might be alone as a no significant other, might not have a lot of friends. It could be self-inflicted. It could be, I don't know, you were arrested and put in solitary confinement, a myriad of issues. But that's for me is the difference, where even if you don't have, let's say, a significant other, or you don't have a lot of friends, or you are posted somewhere for your job where it just takes up all your time, where you don't have a lot of access to people, at least in those moments, you might have a Lindon, a Yeren, and a Mercy in your life, whether it's a church community, a bowling league, where you go and you find yourselves among other people and you don't feel lonely, even though you might be alone in whatever example I just said. And it could be a combination of those examples. So I don't mind being alone. I don't mind being put somewhere where I am separated from a lot of my friends, as long as I know that they're still my friends. Like the guy who got married, I was the best man at his wedding, Adam. We've known each other for 20 years. Sometimes we went months without speaking, but whenever we call each other, it's as if we spoke yesterday. Same with you. And same way this podcast actually started. We go listen to episode 99. So that's for me is the difference between being alone and being lonely. And for Yeren, here's where my supporting evidence comes in. For Yeren, she truly doesn't have anybody. The person who saved her and trained her and made her who she is, which helps her survive in this world of Cradle, he's gone. And she finds, although she won't admit it, she finds purpose in doing the same thing for Lindon. And now she has a love for Lindon. And before this book, I think it was always a sisterly love. There's probably a little bit more romantic tension in this book for me. Maybe I'm reading into it. Maybe I'm not. But she does have a love for Lindon, a true care for him. And so if he leaves her, I don't know why she would think that, but she does, and probably because of her background. So I understand it in that sense. If he leaves her, she'll be truly alone like she was before she found Lindon. And I think that's what scares the crap out of her.
We actually see a moment like this at the end of, I think it was Black Flame, where she's recovering and Ethan comes into the room and she has like this inner dialogue. And I wish I would have pulled it up beforehand, but she has one of those emotional moments where she thinks about like, oh, I might be alone, because she's deciding whether or not to join the Aurelius family. And Lyndon has already agreed to join. So as a response to you, like, I don't know why she thinks that way. It's like, well, we all think like we all think these weird thoughts that are like, oh, that's a weird thought, and they fears and things. And from my perspective, it's actually it's a meta-ethic ordeal where not every thought you have is your own. Sometimes it's your subconscious, sometimes it's the Lord, sometimes it's the devil, but like not every thought you have is your own, and you need to know the difference.
Before you move on, I just want to put an asterisk or a footnote to my definitions of alone and lonely. I think being alone and being okay with being alone means being by oneself. It's a state. It doesn't necessarily imply any particular emotional or psychological feelings. And being lonely happens when people are disconnected, isolated, even if they are surrounded by people.
So you stole my thunder, because I was going to tell you that being alone is a state of being, and being lonely is an emotional place of living. Thanks for stealing my thunder. So I hope you feel good about yourself.
I do. I have surpassed you in Jungian philosophy.
Yeah. Well, you let's circle back, because you asked me about Lindon and explaining a little more on my end.
Yeah, let's do it.
Why I feel like Lindon, we got to go back to book 1. If you are a regular listener, which a lot of you are, you know that I talk about my birth defect regularly. Well, how do I even put this into a short explanation? But when you're born with something that literally affects your state of living, and it's not like other normal human bodies, average human bodies, it sets you apart. And then if there's a deformity physically on you, like there is on me, then that affects your social status. And it means when you're growing up, you can't always go to pool parties because you're embarrassed. You have to deal with a lot more stuff that happens later for other people in middle school, high school, when you're growing up. But as like a kid who's 5 to 10 when other people start dealing with these things more regularly when they're teenagers. And I didn't have an option because kids are cruel and my body doesn't look the same as other kids. My body doesn't function the same. And so with Lyndon, always feeling behind and being treated differently, feeling like the black sheep of your family, not just because you like nerd things, but because like, oh, no, I actually am super different from my family. It's just like physiologically, body functional. And it's like, well, I need to go for like a little peek behind the curtain. I drive everywhere. I don't let anyone else drive. You could say it's a control thing because of the birth defect, like I have to go to the bathroom at much more regular intervals than other people. Because of it, I also can't hold it the way that other people do because of the kidney stone crystals. And so like for Lyndon, it's always feeling like you're on the outside and you're never going to catch up to people and you're never going to fit in that sense. And so you have to carve your own path. You have to carve your twin paths. And so seeing a character like this, as well as one who like yearns for power to simply overcome his internal and external states, but still wanting to be grounded in his personal values and motivations, all of that resonates very deeply with me. Lyndon also, it's not clear, but I would say he's a community-oriented person, and he actually draws community toward himself, which is another thing that I resonate with. And so his idea of like fear of falling behind, part of my drive for the last decade has been like, I am behind. And the only way to catch up is to work so hard and to be exhausted. There was a time I was working 3 jobs, a normal day job that paid normal stuff, and then running Uber and doing side gigs that I'd pick up on the internet for freelance. Like there were times where I'd have to just stop Ubering and find a parking lot and take a nap because I was so exhausted. This fear of falling behind or being behind, I think is actually quite normal when you finally wake up, because I think a lot of millennials are still asleep. Not all of them. Some of them have been working hard on their careers and stuff, but I meet a lot of them who are behind because they haven't put the work in. Because no one hands you a house, no one hands you a job that makes good money enough to live. Like the world keeps changing, and so you have to adapt or you will fall behind. So those are just a few quips and personal testimonies from myself and my life and things that I've gone through and have had to confront, because your parents, you don't even know how to explain it when you're a kid. And you're like, well, I don't want to go to my friend's house for the sleepover because I look different, or I have to go to the bathroom way more than everyone else. And kids don't understand. They're curious and ask questions, but you, as the person dealing with it, are embarrassed because other people don't deal with this. Yeah. And like, you don't know what emotions are because you're 6. So it's just like, okay, well, it's better to not feel that way, so I don't feel that way if I don't go. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And not to crap on your parents, but it seems like an intuitive parent, somebody who's attuned with their kids' needs, would understand why Jonathan doesn't want to go to Billy's house.
Well, both my parents have, and I don't even say this colloquially, both my parents have deep trauma from their childhood. They gave us a really beautiful gift in not repeating the cycles that their parents gave them with the physical abuse and the other abuse that they went through. And so I don't think that they were capable, and this isn't a slight against them, it's just like sometimes you just don't know what you're dealing with. My parents were concerned that I was going to die when I was born. So like there was just this like, I don't know if he's going to live. There was an emotional detachment that happened. Like, I mean, happy to get into it at a different episode, but I don't disagree with you. But holding the mirror up for themselves was not something that they could even consider. And the thing is, I have to deal with the consequences of that, right? So like I had to go to therapy. I had to figure out like, well, why am I feeling this way? Why do other people not deal with this? And that's, I mean, going back to Lyndon, that's why I feel very close to Lyndon, where it's like, he didn't have anybody. Even when he gets Ethan, he's like, I don't know if I can trust this person. Even Yeren, he's like, I mean, she's kind of there, but I don't know if she's going to show up this time. And like, there's this constant distrust of other people because you just don't know if people are to be relied on, because so far in your life, they haven't been able to be relied on. So now that we're down this deep rabbit hole, and I don't know how to get us back, but feel free to whatever.
So if you guys are enjoying these kind of side quests, here's another reason for you to subscribe to the show. So you can support the show right now by sharing it with a fellow book lover and somebody else who wants to join this casual book club. But I think our next quest, our next segment, we should focus on some of your notes here. Setting up the world. I think that was a great thing you dropped into our template here. So let's unpack 2 or 3 of these things that you have here. Let me start, and then maybe you can pick another one. So like the hierarchy of power and advancement paths. I chose that one out of your list because I think that sets up the world. Because the world is more than, oh, this is 1500s Venice, like it was for Liza Locklamora, which is part of the world building.
So good.
Heck yeah. Which is part of world building, and the river systems and the boats and the clothes that they wear. That's all part of world building too. But there's more to the world building than just that. Here, the concept of a hierarchy of power, I think, is central to the Cradle series. It frames not only individual character arcs, but also the socio-political landscape, if you will, of the world. In Underlord, this hierarchy is organized into levels. In other books too. So you have Jade, Gold, Underlord, and beyond. And each one represents a stage of cultivation or personal spiritual development. And achieving all these levels requires a blend of personal insight, physical skill, demanding that the individuals unlock, quote unquote, truths about themselves. So that itself is the reality, the metaphysics, if you will, of this world. Why I chose this, because I think it creates tangible goals for characters. Each character is in a path that's defined by their efforts. This kind of goes back to what we just mentioned a few minutes ago, to reach the next level. It makes power progression a reflection of personal growth. And that, I totally understand why, you connect with Lyndon, because for Lindon and Yerin, reaching Underlord is not just about gaining strength or power. It's about solidifying their identities, fears, ambitions, their insecurities, all that stuff. Lyndon's fear of insignificance fuels his path in the sacred arts. And for me, while Yeren's fear of loneliness drives her to pursue power to protect those she cares about, because she feels fulfilled in being able to do what she's done for Lyndon, for example. So as I was reading your notes, I thought, wow, we haven't done this on other episodes, and I think we should do it moving forward. Explain that it takes so much more to build a world than just, well, it's a planet in the Cosmere and the magic system is X. That's the integral part. That's an important part. You can't have hierarchy of power and advancement paths, to use your title for it, without an actual world, right? So you have to build the other stuff. You have to build the physical world, if you will, before you can put in all the socio-political, socio-economic, and all the cultural stuff in it. But I think this really makes it pop. I mean, the world of Cradle.
It does. World building is, and I feel like a philosophy 101 student, because I don't know how to say this more eloquently, but world building is nuanced. And the thing is, I just don't know a better way to explain this, because you quoted the Cosmere, and I think that's a great example. If you're a writer and you are looking to do more world building, Sanderson has actual full lectures of his class that he teaches at BYU or BUR or whatever college be an adult. That's the college he goes to.
Yep. It's a Mormon college somewhere in Utah, I think.
Yeah, they're really good. But he has a full 2 sermons, a full 2 lessons on world building. And you have to pick the items you're going to focus on, to your point. Like, okay, it has to be a little bit about the geographics, a little about the culture, a little about maybe the weather, the magic system if you have one. Like, you have to pick 2 or 3 of these, and then you have to filter in almost some sub-topics. To quote Liza Locklamora, too, like Luciano. Jean constantly quotes Luciano in other books moving forward, and Luciano is like a playwright and a poet in the world. We never read any of his books, but Jean quotes them because you all have friends who quote things that they like, whether it's a movie or Seinfeld or whatever.
Family Guy.
You have friends who quote things. That's a normal human thing. And you go, oh, I know people who quote things. And so now you relate with the character, even though you don't know who Luciano is, right? So
yeah,
there's a lot of nuance in making the world that you build feel authentic, and it's really, really hard. because we've all read books that you're like, I don't believe this world. And then you should ask the question, why? Anyway.
That's good, because it goes to a book that we really hated reading, A Head Full of Ghosts. And it's set in reality. Like, it's set in the real world.
Yeah.
And obviously the supernatural part of it is what, supposed
Whether
to be.
or not it was really there. Yeah.
Was supposed to be the unreality or the fantastical portion of the book. At least that's what the author claimed. But because of the way the folks acted in that book, I couldn't get into it. I'm like, there's nobody that talks like this.
Yeah.
Except for the father. And then you use the worst of the worst to make a point in the book. You make him into a caricature, which we won't go down that route again. But you're absolutely right. How you set up certain structures in your world, whether they're the cultural or philosophical or religious, makes it believable or not. It adds to the believability of the story for sure.
Anyway, that's a little bit about world building. Question I have for the audience is, are you building a world? And if so, tell us about it. I would love to have a side quest that's focused around your guys' worlds that you're building, where Slava and I come in and ask questions, and there may be even a time where we invite you on. We've had a couple authors reach out who are new authors and independent authors and go, hey, I wrote this book. It sounds like stuff that you guys read. Would love to know what you think of it. And so we're considering what that looks like moving forward to have you, our guests, be considered on the podcast to discuss your book that you're writing or whatever. So something to consider for those of you who are in the writer realm.
Because as we grow, and what I said to one of the authors that reached out, I said, as we grow, we definitely want to have authors on. It's just the way we built what we have now, that's an extra segment or an extra arm of the podcast. So we moving into 2025, we already have a schedule built out, recording schedule, book schedule. But as we move into 2025, there are steps we're taking to be able to accomplish that. So as we're building the foundation, please reach out to us, specifically on Instagram, DM us. I run the Instagram account. I'm very responsive. People DM me, give us ideas, send us your stuff. And like I said, as we build this foundation, we'll start working on making this a reality. Before we leave this segment, Jonathan, why don't you pick one of the titles here you have? Because they're all great, but I think we should limit ourselves to two. So you pick another one. Let's talk about another world-building segment.
At the risk of beating a dead horse, my segment that I really am drawn to is the balance between personal growth and external conflict, specifically to stuff that I mentioned earlier this episode, where my external conflict was society, not being a part of it, not feeling a part of it, clearly having differences from other people, and then having to choose personal growth. I can't tell you how many times I had to sit alone and journal. It was basically a lifeline for me to determine my personal growth and like, am I going to settle for living this way the rest of my life, or am I willing to do the hard work and open the bandage and let the wound air out and confront it and see if it'll heal? It's hard. The thing is, like, I talk about it almost nonchalantly sometimes, but it's difficult. If you've had healing moments like this, you know what I'm talking about, where like once you're through it, you're like, oh, it's not that it wasn't that bad. It's that I was able to do it, which are two different statements, which is why I love not just Lyndon, Orthos, another good, a staunch curmudgeon, and I'll let Slava define what a curmudgeon is in a minute. A staunch curmudgeon, and we've seen him grow. Every character gets the opportunity of growth. Even Athan, who is almost not a god, monarch type character for where the power levels are at, because he was an Underlord when everyone else was like a low gold, and he has Lyndon. Lyndon's his arm gets cut off, and he has to apologize to his little brother because he's like, yeah, I did let that get out of control. I'm sorry. But the thing is, his I'm sorry doesn't change the fact that Lyndon still lost an arm. Like, that was a really emotional moment for personal growth for Lyndon to decide, like, am I going to hold this person accountable for the rest of my life, or am I going to deal with it? It's a struggle that we all have to have, because I haven't met anyone who's never been wronged before. And the thing about forgiveness is you're setting that person free from needing to pay for what they did. It doesn't mean you have to trust them again. That's just a little life lesson, not necessarily related to Lyndon and Ethan. But yeah, I have a very deep personal tie in books that have personal growth versus external conflicts that characters have to endure. So that for me is just key world building. And I think we've seen that throughout the podcast, if you're a regular listener here, that not just the sentiments that I offer, but the books that I choose as well.
Well, a curmudgeon, for those who are curious, is usually a person who's stubborn, a little prickly, they're critical of things, they're easily annoyed, usually walk around all grumpy. But as most curmudgeons, and sometimes I'm one, they can be endearing. Wah-wah.
Thanks, Orthos.
But only if their grumpiness is mixed with humor and hidden kindness. That's what it says here on the definition I'm reading.
Yeah, I noticed because whenever you speak super directly and eloquently, I'm like, he's reading something.
Yeah, because like I said in the episode 99, I am the Elaine of the podcast. I will break and stumble over my words at least once in every segment.
Well, at least you remember most of your words. I mean, you had one moment this episode, but it was 2 moments in episode 99 for me. I'm like, what is this word? I don't know this word. Now, granted, you guys are culpable in being guilty for not remembering the word either, but so be it. Did you have any thoughts on my world building stuff there, Slava?
Yeah, one thought. I think Will Wight in the Cradle series consistently intertwines Lindon and his companions, specifically Yeren here, the ones we're following, even Mercy for this book and the previous, with struggles and challenges they face from rival factions, big world-scale threats, and cosmic threats and conflicts that are going on around them. And it puts them in the middle of these things, and then those internal struggles are happening at the same time. I think Wight does that exceptionally well. And the more and more we talk about it, the more and more I'm like, yeah, this is definitely a great use of this genre for what he's trying to do.
I agree. So, since we're sort of immersed in the world at the moment, let's do another side quest here that I thought of that I wanted to run us through. What would your personal path be if you were living in the world of Cradle? And what would be one of your sacred arts techniques?
Good question. Okay, I think I'm ready.
So, you've had a moment or two to think. So what do you think your personal path is in the sacred arts and a technique or two?
Well, because of my work, my job, which includes strategy and creativity, digital strategy specifically, we're going to go with the path of the Visionary Forge.
Exciting. What is that? What is that?
I will tell you.
Those sound like fun words. What is that?
Well, it's a sacred arts focus that draws upon the innovative Madra, a unique blend of insight aura and creation aura. On this path, I have a very rare balance of visionary foresight and the power to mold ideas and people into tangible, tactile forms.
So you're a dictator.
I am some sort of demigod that can apparently create people.
Hold up. You're not a demigod. You're just a dictator. We'll call you Salazar.
I don't know what that means, but fine.
Salazar was a dictator in Portugal.
Oh. Okay.
In the
Slavazar?
50s to the 74, something like that. It's like 20-something years.
Right. Yes. Okay, so
Slavazar. Sure.
Slavazar.
What would one of your techniques be?
So I will have the Forger's Flame, which is a creative force that fuels the act of building and adapting. By channeling creation aura, I can mold ideas or structures in real time.
And how do you advance in your path?
Well, my path focuses heavily on internal insight and external influence. See how this works, people? To get all the way to Underlord and possibly beyond, you have to establish a foundation of mental resilience. You have to mark your ability also to empower others around you. And eventually you'll become nearly unbreakable in your mental defense.
Exciting. It's quite the path. Do you have any disciples?
Many. many disciples. I just create them out of thin air, apparently.
Uh-huh.
So they're like the
Slavazar.
undead from Warbreaker.
Oh. Lifeless?
The lifeless, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why this always happens, but I'm always some sort of a crazy dictator in all these scenarios that we planned out.
I think it comes from your people.
Nah, probably. They just need a strong father figure to lead them, and I'm willing to take the mantle.
It just reminds me of when we were talking about Baal and the cult.
What about you, Jonathan? What's your path?
So my path took some creative brainstorming, but mine is the path of the ever-expanding horizon. My path focuses on growth, adaptability, and vision. People who practice my path are often driven by a desire to surpass limitations, seek new knowledge, and refine themselves continually. Oftentimes, these people are strategic, and they see opportunities in any situation, and are known for their resilience and innovation.
So what's one of your techniques then?
One of my techniques is the resonance pulse. It's a powerful technique because every technique should be powerful. Maybe. But I release a pulse of aura tuned to the resonance of existing aura in an area or environment. And it helps me create harmony within my team, and I amplify my allies' abilities while disrupting opponents' techniques or disabling their flow of energy.
Nice. What does it take to get to Underlord?
You don't sound very blown away by my resonance pulse, so maybe I'm not doing it right.
No, I'm here creating Lifeless for the war against your clan, so...
Oh, we're fighting. Okay.
Why not?
All right. Okay.
So, but how do you
Fair
get to Underlord?
Well, to become an Underlord, you have to face a personal test called the Horizon Leap. It's a profound solitary experience where you have to confront a vision of your ideal self against the future you wish to create. And the challenge is acknowledging your limitations and insecurities, kind of like I talked about, without letting them shake your foundation, but only embracing your current self with the potential. So integrating, it's very Jungian, integrating yourself. Can you leap beyond your current horizon? So passing this stage would unify your physical, spiritual, and mental self to create a more stable and enhanced aura for your Underlord Soulfire in the path of the ever-expanding horizon.
Very nice. I like it. I look forward to us warring together.
Warring together or warring each other?
Each
Those
other.
could be different.
Yes. Yes, each
Because
other.
we could war together. I'm fine with that.
Either
Where
way.
are we gonna war? I mean, there's dozens of enemies we could pick from. Dozens. The Uruk-hai.
Yeah, who are the assholes to Lindon that... Well,
Pick one. There's a bunch.
right.
You mean the Senshin?
No. It was one of the clans from the early books. They were just like complete...
Oh, you mean book one?
No, book one was his clan.
The Heaven's Glory School?
Yeah, those guys.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
book one. That was the clan that didn't like his clan.
Yes.
But his clan was also very rude.
Yes.
So, anyway. Yeah, you don't sound too impressed with my sacred path, my sacred arts path.
I'm impressed. You're doing pretty well for a Jade.
That's demeaning, but okay.
I'm embracing the culture of the Cradle world.
I've noticed. Why don't you give me instead, because your team's about to be defeated, some thoughts on the structures that Will uses in his plots? And we move on from the sacred paths. Although I do want to revisit this question for the rest of the squad when they come back on.
I'm going to pick one out of the list that we have here because it ties into everything we talked about, in the previous segments. And it's the goal-oriented structure. In Cradle, this is fundamental, as each character has clear objectives, their actions are driven by something, their decisions are driven by internal, external forces, and even relationships. So this structure, I think, gives us, the readers, a strong sense of purpose and direction. This is why you identify with Lindon. And Will aligns the structure power hierarchy that the characters work through to everything else. It's there's like sinew in between all of this. And I think that's what makes Lindon relatable, Yeren relatable, especially as they face these things. like you said, you can identify with X with Lyndon. I can identify with Y with Yeren. As they go through these obstacles on the way to reaching their goals, as the reader, you're taken on the journey. As they reach new levels, like Underlord, and as I mentioned before, it's more than a pursuit of power, right? It's a journey of self-fulfillment, self-discovery, it's survival, it's the protection of friends, so it's the building of community. And this goal-oriented structure, I think it's pretty straightforward, and I think it creates a good framework for a series such as Cradle, because you get to be around your buddies, your team here, through their struggles, motivation, their growth, evolution. It gives readers like an end game. And that's where the question comes back up again. Where does this end? When does the story of Cradle end? But each time they're facing something, it seems like it intensifies. And it's not a constant intensification where like craziness, you don't know what's going on. Just each obstacle is bigger than the last. In some way it is, because there's obstacles that they're facing now are bigger than they faced in book one. But at the same time, as they grow, you see them conquering other obstacles that they probably couldn't have in book two, to use it as an example. So I think Wight is skillful. I think he does this really well. He frames each character's obstacles around their unique struggles, be it physical, mental, or emotional. I don't want to repeat what you said is believable, because makes it believable, but it's more than that. It's the word I like to use in these kind of situations. It's robust. There's more to it than just A happened, then B happened, then C happened, and Lindon won, and that's it.
And we've talked about this in other books, not knowing what the characters want. Having a goal-oriented structure in the plot where it's like, Lyndon wants to grow. Ethan wants to not be alone at the top. Yeren wants, whatever Yeren wants, to not be alone. Knowing where the characters are, to your point, and knowing where they want to go is vital to the reader. And this has been my complaint in other books, where it's like, well, what does the character want? We don't believe characters that are like, I guess I'll do this now. I guess I'll do that now. Even characters who are reluctant, we believe, like Bilbo. Well, I don't want to go on an adventure. Well, you're going. But I don't want to go. It doesn't matter. You're going anyway. That, at least, I know what he wants. He doesn't want to go on an adventure, as opposed to lackadaisical characters who are like, well, I guess I'll do this now. It's like Eeyore. I guess I'll do this now.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. Absolutely.
So that's honestly one of the metrics that I use, if you're a regular listener here, to determine whether a book is good or not, because the character development, like even if it's a plot-based book and you don't get a whole lot of character development, I should at least get some. And to get some means I need to know where the character wants to go. Definitely love the goal-oriented structure that Wight uses in his books. And not just this one, but also some of the other ones, like House of Blades, which I don't know if we'll get to. It's, his debut series, trilogy. It was a fun read. When you go back to an author's earlier sections of their writing, you're like, oh, this feels a little less fleshed out. And it is, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just like, oh, it's the earlier stuff. Sanderson, with his first published Elantris. There's a character named Galadin. Not kidding. One of the main characters is named Galadin. Galadin. Right? So, like, it's an early stage writing. But the thing is, you want them to have early stage writing, because then that lets them get better.
And I recently did this. I went back and read King's first book, Carrie,
yeah,
which I had never read. And you could totally see King. Like, it's early, not everything's fleshed out like it is in his other books, even shorter books.
Mm-hmm.
But you can definitely see King. And I definitely see why it got the acclaim that it did, and why it popped the way it did, and why it gave him standing as the king of horror. Because it's early King, but it's believable characters. You get inside their heads. They're well-rounded. They know what they want or don't want. To continue on this track specifically, it's fun. I recommend anybody who's into an author but haven't read the first published book, and I'm pretty much a King fan, and I haven't read his first book in the last more than 20 years of reading him.
Right.
So going back to it was really, really fun. But how do you think he accomplishes this goal-oriented structure? So that's the plot, right? One of the key components of the plot. There's a goal-oriented structure for all the Cradle books. But how do you think he accomplishes it, let's say, using internal monologue? Like, so one's a plot device, one's a literary device to accomplish the plot goals. So I'm just going to pick one because we have a lot of it in these books. Internal monologue. How do you think that accomplishes what Will is doing here? Besides the obvious, right? Because yes, we get insights into their thoughts, but I think Will does it so well. I want you to help me unpack that.
Well, I was gonna point to the obvious because I think that writing the internal monologue is the easiest way to explain the goals, because then you can share their fears, their desires as they go. And I think this book is a clear example. And without having done a preliminary deep dive analysis, analyzing each word in each chapter, I think that because it's pop fiction and it's based on, what did JT say? The Monkey King, right?
Something like that. I forget.
The main structure it follows. I'd say getting the internal monologue with the characters allows you to write a structure like this, honestly, more easily, because he's omnipresent, third-party omnipresent, where we get to see other characters and their perspectives and their inner monologues. And that inner look to their inner world lets you know, even when it's quips of like, oh, Northstrider's doing this right now. You're like, oh, interesting. Serial's doing this in the Abaddon realm, right? And then, oh, Ethan's doing this and Lyndon's doing this. It honestly makes his life easier to have a goal-oriented framework in his plots when he gets to use the internal monologue.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think there's nothing else besides the obvious. I think you're right.
Because Will's not trying to be philosophical. He's just writing a fun, fast-paced book, which is why, I don't think that it's fair to say, well, besides the obvious, it's like, well, no, this is a fast-paced pop fiction book.
Yeah, that's fair. It's totally fair, because once you get a glimpse of these inner thoughts, you, as the reader, gain understanding of Lyndon. For example, his determination and his vulnerability, which, again, makes him relatable, specifically to you, which I think is great. And for Yeren, I think the conflict in her, the struggle with loneliness, and now in this book, the complicated feelings towards Lyndon, I think it reveals tension in herself and that need for connection and the fear of losing people. All that is just beefed up by getting us inside the heads of these characters. Because Will could explain that in a way. And then Yeren felt this way. Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But now we get actually Yeren going through the motions of the emotions.
Bleed and bury me. Quick side quest. Are you on Team Yeren or Team Mercy still?
Oh.
For romance. With the boy.
Oh.
Because before you were on Team Mercy, but now you're telling me that you're reading into that there might be something with Yeren. So which team are you on?
Well, let's give the audience a little bit of a backstory. So some of the books we cover, including this series, it's sort of like Slava reacts. Slava reads the book, and then Jonathan prods him with some questions like, what do you think is going to happen? Because just like with the Stormlight Archives, this is my first foray into this type of pop fiction outside of watching anime. This is me reading, for all intents and purposes, reading anime. But when you said Yeren's going to leave, I thought that might be because Lyndon and Mercy might have a thing going, might develop a friendship might develop a romantic relationship.
We're just friends.
Yeah. Now that Mercy is an underlady and gone, maybe that won't happen because her fears are being realized that she is now in a different position and has a different goal that's set for her. So she's not necessarily going to be palling around with Lyndon and Ethan. And because Yeren is having feelings, the way I'm reading what's going on in the book, is having some sort of feelings for Lyndon that are crossing the line between sisterly kind of camaraderie, friendship, love to, maybe there's something a little bit more here. My answer then is, I don't know.
Wow, that was quite the buildup.
I'm kidding. I'm just being a jerk. I think there's a possibility of Yeren and Lyndon developing some sort of romantic relationship.
So I'm going to throw a wrench in that because Lyndon was just removed from Yeren's team for the tournament. Lyndon's on Mercy's team. Charity comes up and goes, hey, I'm picking these people. Lyndon has to live at the Akura household. Mercy's going to run the team. Lyndon owes us a debt. So Lyndon and Mercy are separated from Yeren, and they have to fight.
Oh, goodness. I totally blanked on that.
I figured because I was like listening to your answer, and I was like, well, let me just remind you of how next book is going to go. It's they're on separate teams, and they have to. The thing is, Lyndon can't go, oh, I'm going to not fight you, for a few reasons. Yeren would hate him because she's like, don't hold back, actually fight. And Charity wouldn't let him just cowardice out like, oh, you're not going to fight your friends correctly? You owe me a debt because you killed one of my family members.
Yeah, it's true. I totally blanked. Well,
So it's a rising tension.
Totally. So then I think if Lyndon and Mercy are the same rank and they're forced to be close to each other, there could be something that develops there. But I don't know. I'm just making assumptions.
Yeah.
Are there romantic elements to this series? People do fall in love and do whatever that entails with that?
I guess we'll have to find out.
I guess so. So yeah, sorry, I didn't think that was a...
Some side quests only leave you with a new tunic and a walking stick.
This is true. I lost all my gear and I have a rotting muffin and a stick now.
Yeah. But I'll bring us back here because I want to build on what you mentioned with the goal-oriented structure. Something that I really like for the way that Will structures the books as we move forward in the episode here is he creates layerings. And the layering, I think, really builds on the personal stakes from the internal monologues the characters have, mixed with the escalating stakes from external pieces with the dread gods waking up, the factions warring against each other, the tension between, hey, you killed one of my family members. And so it starts macro level where it's like, okay, there's these warring factions. They're so far above us. Like, they're so much more powerful than us. How could we even consider dealing with them? And then they get swept up into it because of the looming dread god issues, because the monarchs, which is the top level of power level, they're like, well, we can't do anything with the dread gods. And as we get to books 10 and 11, we'll learn why the monarchs have issues with the dread gods and they haven't been able to defeat them. But for right now, we don't know. And it's part of the unfolding where they're so low level compared to those characters, but they're swept up into the rising action of it. It really gives Wight the opportunity to make the characters blossom into growing up into those power levels. And so there's this urgency mixed with internal conflicts, which is some of the structures that I really like because he layers them together.
A big yes to all the things you just said. I think in Cradle, internal, external conflicts are essential to driving character growth. And it propels the story forward, but you also see the goals being attained. And Will Wight weaves these conflicts together in a way that creates, like you said, I think, a layered narrative. There's personal stakes intertwined with external threats and challenges, the people that are fighting their own stuff up here. You have the low-level characters doing their own thing. You have more than one plot line happening. And we get snippets here, snippets there. There's places where it intersects. All this creates structures, right? And I think those structures, I believe, as I read it, I'm saying this for a fact in my own life, these structures are relatable to our personal lives.
100%. And I think that that's why the book stands out, because who hasn't gone through personal growth, even forced upon them? Who hasn't had an external conflict that they got swept into at work, right? Who hasn't dealt with the rising actions of urgency in the bigger world that they don't get to control? Literally all of us have dealt with all those things. I think that as people read these things, they go, oh, wow, I really relate with these characters, even though the world is completely different from theirs.
Right, because I just read an article how people have election fatigue. We're recording this days away from the 2024 presidential election, and people are freaking out. And that's stuff that you can't control. Well, to an extent, you can vote, and maybe you'll vote for the person that wins. Those struggles and the fear of the unknown that might come your way if the wrong person wins, or if the right person wins, whether it would be a backlash, because all the conversations that are happening right now in the political sphere, I think that's just an example of how It is relatable.
Yeah, I was thinking even bigger than that, like geopolitical, right? Like, what's Russia doing in Ukraine? You know, what's China building when they're taking over Hong Kong again because the British pulled out? Like, these are the things that we don't necessarily have control over, but they will affect taxes, tariffs, trade, price of gas, things like that. That's just to name a few, right? Like, there's these things going on. You could call them dread gods, right? They're things that we don't get to control, and we're so low level that we don't actually get to influence them. They still affect our lives in some ways. That's why I think that the books like this are really relatable, because we've all dealt with external factors that are dread gods, if you will, where we're so out of our realm, even trying to consider engaging with them is almost useless because you have no authority to influence the issues. So anyway, I think that that's it. That's the episode.
I think so, folks. This was a long one, but good one.
Long one, but good one. Back in the saddle with Cradle. But before you vanish back to reality, drop us a quick review on your favorite podcast platform. It keeps our quest alive and helps other book adventurers find their way here. Next time, we'll continue going through Cradle and diving into the details of Underlord. And then the third episode in this series will be, again, with 6 guests total, or 6 people total. Your 2 hosts and 4 guests. 1 new one, who's an old one. And we're looking forward to that. So be sure to stay tuned.
That's right. Take a moment and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform and share it with your book-loving friends. And we'll see you next time on SideQuest.